Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Tonight, we're going to dim the lights and ease into a journey back in time, to a place often overlooked when we think of the Great War. We won't be in the muddy trenches or the thick of battle tonight. Instead, we'll be stepping into the worn boots of someone whose job was just as vital, but much quieter. Someone who helped keep the entire war machine running, piece by painstaking piece. Trust me, being a real logistics soldier was nothing like the movies. Unless the movie was about lifting heavy boxes and dodging potholes. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan if you like. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You remember the day you made that decision. Europe was ablaze, and the atmosphere of war permeated every corner of life. The newspapers were filled with grim headlines, and the air felt heavy with uncertainty and fear. The call to arms echoed through cities and villages, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of everyday noise. Not everyone was destined for the front lines. Not everyone was born to hold a gun and fight directly. Perhaps it was an old football injury that never quite healed, a cough that lingered too long through the damp winters. Or simply that your particular skill set lay not in marching or shooting, but in making things go, in ensuring the wheels turned and the necessary items arrived where they needed to be. You felt that familiar mix of apprehension and a quiet sense of duty, a need to contribute to your country, not with bullets or bayonets, but with arrangements, with endless truck rides, with crates and manifests and miles of railway track. You'd volunteered, or maybe you received that official-looking envelope with your call-up papers. And now the predictable rhythm of the everyday had been left behind, giving way to a new journey, one measured not in battles won or lost, but in supplies delivered, in the quiet, persistent effort of simply doing the job as you stood there. Perhaps in a bustling recruitment office filled with the nervous energy of hundreds of other young men, or maybe later, stepping onto the grounds of a sprawling supply depot for the very first time. The uniform felt alien on your skin. It was rough wool, perhaps itchy, smelling faintly of mothballs or the sweat of the soldier who wore it before you. It wasn't tailored, it just fit or didn't fit. In most places, the air here at the depot was different from home. Gone was the scent of baking bread or damp earth after a rain. Here, there was a new mix. The sharp tang of coal smoke from distant trains, the earthy, pungent smell of horses, the dry, dusty odor of cardboard and wood from countless crates stacked high. Even the silence between the shouts of orders and the rumble of engines wasn't truly silent. It was filled with a low, constant murmur, the sound of a massive, distant beast stirring. You weren't going to the noise and chaos of the front line just yet. You were going into the organized, if slightly overwhelming, chaos of keeping that front line supplied. This wasn't the glamorous side of war, not the charge across no man's land you might have read about in penny dreadfuls. This was the unseen effort, the constant grind behind the scenes. But even here, in the piles of equipment and the endless rows of tents and temporary structures, you were part of something immense. something that stretched back across continents and forward into the uncertain future. You were a single, crucial gear in the colossal, clanking machinery of the war effort. And your journey through this world of supplies was just beginning. Stepping onto the main grounds of the depot felt like entering a different country altogether. It wasn't a town, not a village, but something built purely for purpose, a temporary city of logistics. Your boots crunched on gravel paths, or perhaps sunk slightly into packed dirt that turned to mud with the slightest rain. Everywhere you looked, there were things, piles and piles of things. Wooden crates stood stacked higher than a man's head, stretching into seemingly endless rows, each one stenciled with cryptic codes indicating its contents and destination. Bales of canvas were tied tightly with rope. Bundles of shovels leaned against makeshift walls, and rolls of barbed wire lay coiled like slumbering metal snakes. The air here had a particular blend of smells that would soon become utterly familiar. The strange perfume of wartime supply, there was the undeniable scent of horses, warm and earthy, mingling with the sharp, metallic tang of oil and grease from the motor vehicles, the still relatively new. Sputtering trucks that shared the workload with the more traditional horsepower. You could catch the dry, slightly sweet smell of hay and fodder stored for the animals, mixed with the musty odor of canvas tents and the distinct, clean scent of newly milled lumber used for repairs and more crates. It was a smell of functional chaos, of raw materials waiting to be transformed into something useful at the front. The sounds were a constant symphony of work. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of hammers as carpenters repaired crates or built new structures. The distant, rumbling cough of a truck engine struggling to start or idling impatiently. The jingle and stomp of horses being moved or harnessed. The gruff shouts of foremen giving orders, punctuated by the scraping of dollies, the creak of wagon wheels, and the soft, shuffling footsteps of hundreds of men moving purposefully between the stacks. Even the moments that seemed quiet were underscored by the low hum of activity happening just out of sight. The constant breathing of the depot. You might be assigned to a team handling incoming shipments, learning the frustrating dance of checking manifests against actual contents, your fingers growing smudged with ink and dust. Or perhaps you were part of an unloading detail, your shoulders quickly aching from the awkward weight of ammunition boxes or bulky equipment. Maybe your job involved sorting endless piles of mail. The most precious cargo of all, each letter a fragile link between the grim reality of the front and the anxious hearts back home. You saw the faces of the men around you. Some were older, perhaps reservists or those deemed unfit for combat, their faces etched with the lines of lives lived before the war. Others were young, like you, still trying to make sense of this sudden, demanding reality. There was a shared look in their eyes, a mixture of weariness, resignation, and a quiet determination to just get through the day. You were all part of this world now, bound together by the sheer volume of stuff that needed sorting, lifting, and moving. And as you looked at the seemingly endless piles stretching towards the horizon, you began to grasp just how much stuff there truly was. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, hinting at the colossal appetite of the war machine you were now helping to feed. But this was just your immediate corner of this vast operation, the journey of these supplies. And your role within it was only just beginning. Life at the depot quickly settled into a rhythm, a predictable pattern dictated by the arrival and departure of trains, trucks, and horse-drawn wagons. Your days became a sequence of repetitive tasks, each one a small, crucial action in the grand, ongoing process of resupply, loading, unloading, sorting, stacking, checking, securing. Over and over again, the work was physical, demanding a steady, often relentless effort. You learned the specific ache that settled into your lower back after hours of bending and lifting heavy crates. You felt the rough, splintered wood against your palms, sometimes giving you small, irritating jabs despite the crude work gloves that offered minimal protection. Your muscles would protest at first, stiff and sore in the morning, but gradually they adapted, becoming stronger, more capable. Even as the fatigue remained a constant companion, a dull throb at the edges of your awareness, the sounds of these tasks became the soundtrack to your days. The rhythmic clunk as another crate was lowered onto a wagon bed. The grating scrape of heavy boxes being dragged across a wooden floor. The sharp snap as ropes were pulled taut to secure a load. The distant, mournful whistle of a train arriving or departing, signaling a new wave of work or a moment of brief respite before the next task began. And beneath it all, the constant shuffling of feet, a quiet testament to the hundreds of men engaged in the same endless cycle. Your mind, needing to escape the monotony, would often drift. You'd find yourself focusing intently on small details, the intricate pattern of wood grain on a crate, the way the dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slicing through the air, or the specific, slightly off-key squeak of a particular handcart you used frequently. Sometimes, you'd try to guess the contents of a crate based on its weight or the symbols stenciled on its side: ammo, RATIONS, medical supplies, or something more obscure that sparked quiet speculation among your fellow workers. There was a subtle, shared humor found in the absurdities of the cargo. Why so many pairs of left boots? Who needed this many identical small metal widgets? The official explanations rarely filtered down to your level. You just moved the items where they were told to go, often with a shrug and a wry glance at the man working beside you. It wasn't laugh-out-loud funny, but a quiet, knowing amusement born of shared experience and the need to find lightness wherever you could. Occasionally, someone would sing a low tune as they worked, or a quiet conversation would start up, usually about food, sleep, or letters from home. These moments were precious, tiny islands of human connection in the vast sea of work. But soon enough, another order would be barked, another shipment would arrive, and you'd return to the rhythm, the steady, physical, repetitive motion of moving the necessary things, knowing that somewhere, perhaps many miles away, someone was waiting for this crate, this bundle, this essential piece of the puzzle that you were helping to push forward. The scale of the need felt immense, and your part, though small, felt undeniably vital. It was a strange mix of feeling insignificant and indispensable all at once. While your hands were busy lifting crates, checking manifests, and navigating the immediate chaos of the depot, it was easy to forget that you were just one small node in a vast, intricate network that stretched far beyond your immediate surroundings. This was the invisible river of supplies, the lifeblood of the entire war effort, flowing constantly from factories and farms, ports and warehouses, all the way to the hungry, demanding front lines. Think about it for a moment. Consider the sheer numbers involved. An army of 1 million men doesn't just run on courage and orders. It runs on boots, bullets, bandages, and beans every single day. That army needed staggering amounts of food, something like 3 pounds per man, per day. If you multiply that out, that's around 3 million pounds of food daily. To put that into perspective, that's over 1,360 tons of food that had to be sourced, packed, transporting, and distributed every single day to feed just 1 million soldiers. And that's just food. Add to that the millions of rounds of ammunition fired daily, the replacement uniforms, the spare parts for guns and vehicles, the medical supplies, the endless lengths of barbed wire, the timber for trenches, the coal for trains, the fodder for horses. The list was effectively infinite. This colossal demand created a logistical challenge unlike anything the world had ever seen. It required railways operating around the clock, trains rumbling through the countryside, carrying everything from heavy artillery shells to crates of cigarettes. It needed vast fleets of ships crossing treacherous oceans, dodging submarines to bring supplies from distant lands. It relied on convoys of sputtering trucks navigating often terrible roads and, crucially, tens of thousands of horses, pulling wagons through mud and difficult terrain where machines couldn't go. Depots like yours, scattered behind the lines, were like vital organs in this massive circulatory system, receiving, sorting, and pushing the necessary items ever closer to their final destination. Your work, seemingly simple and repetitive on its own, was part of this gigantic, coordinated effort. That crate of rifle ammunition you just unloaded might have started its journey in a factory thousands of miles away, traveled by train to a port, crossed the sea on a ship, been transferred to a railway car, and finally arrived here by truck or wagon, waiting for you and your mates to move it to the next stage. You were a crucial link in this long, fragile chain. If your depot was slow, if a shipment was delayed, if a crate went missing, it could have ripple effects, potentially leaving men at the front without the very things they needed to survive and fight. It was a system built on immense scale and constant pressure, a testament to industrial capacity and human organization operating under extreme duress. While the glory went to the soldiers in the trenches, the foundation upon which their efforts rested was built by the unseen labor of hundreds of thousands like you. Managing the flow of supplies, you weren't firing a rifle, but you were directly contributing to the army's ability to do so. Your quiet, back-breaking work was powering the front lines, one crate, one shipment, 1 ton at a time. Amidst the endless stream of regulation issue supplies, the rifles, the canned bully beef, the endless rolls of khaki cloth, you would sometimes encounter cargo that felt different, that carried a weight beyond its physical mass. Or perhaps you'd simply see the small, personal items soldiers carried, hinting at the private world of hopes and fears beneath the uniform. You might, on occasion, handle crates specifically marked religious materials, filled with Bibles, prayer books, or other spiritual items, as you lifted one of these boxes. Perhaps lighter than the crates of ammunition, but somehow feeling heavier in significance, you couldn't help but think about where they were going, to men facing horrors you could only dimly imagine. You might briefly inhale the faint, dry scent of paper and old ink, a stark contrast to the dominant smells of oil and dust, and then you'd see it. Or hear stories about it from men passing through on their way to or from the lines, the quiet, almost secretive act of a soldier tucking a small Bible or a prayer book carefully inside his uniform. Often right over his heart, it wasn't just for reading, it was intended as a shield, a fragile, paper and cloth barrier against cold, hard metal, a belief held by many in the face of overwhelming odds. That this sacred text, pressed against their skin, could somehow deflect a bullet, or at least offer a tiny sliver of divine protection in a world that felt utterly godless. It's a strange thought, isn't it? In a conflict defined by industrial-scale death, by machine guns and artillery shells and poison gas, men placed their faith in a small book to stop a piece of flying lead traveling at incredible speed. This deeply human, almost desperate need for a personal safeguard, a charm against the terrifying randomness of fate, coexisting with the brutal, mechanical reality of the battlefield, while you were focused on the practicalities, the weight, the destination, ensuring the count was correct on the manifest. You were indirectly facilitating these beliefs. You were moving the physical objects that became imbued with such profound, if perhaps futile, hope. Your world was about tangible goods, about ensuring X tons of material got from point A to point B. Their world, just miles away but feeling like a different dimension, was about clinging to anything, a lucky charm, a ritual, a belief in a higher power, or a flimsy book that might offer a chance of survival. It highlighted the stark difference between your reality and theirs. Yet also the fundamental connection. You supplied the bullets they fired, the food they ate, and yes, the very book some hoped would save their lives from those same bullets. It was a reminder that war wasn't just about the movement of materials. It was about the hopes, fears, and strange, quiet rituals of the human beings caught within its gears. And as you secured another crate, the weight of that thought lingered, the understanding that beneath the routine and the logistics, you were dealing, in a roundabout way, with the very essence of survival, and the lengths men would go to grasp at it. Your journey through these unseen currents of the war was proving to be far more complex than simply moving boxes. Sometimes your job wasn't just about handling things within the depot walls. Sometimes you were part of the delivery itself, tasked with accompanying a vital shipment closer to the lines, or even directly to a smaller forward area dump. These journeys offered a different perspective, a chance to see the world beyond the endless stacks of crates. Albeit a world increasingly scarred by conflict, perhaps you were assigned to a sputtering motor truck, its engine coughing and rattling like a consumptive old man. Or maybe you rode alongside a driver on a horse-drawn wagon, the slow, rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves, a more ancient sound mingling with the distant rumble of the guns. However you traveled, the experience of being on the road during wartime was unique. The world blurred past you differently than it did from a train window. You felt every bump and rut in the poorly maintained roads, the vehicle lurching and swaying, the cargo shifting precariously behind you. The smell of the depot faded, replaced by the ever-changing scents of the countryside, fresh earth after rain, the damp, decaying leaves in a wood, the faint, sweet smell of distant farms that somehow clung on despite everything, and, gradually, subtly, another smell would begin to creep in, the acrid, metallic scent of wood smoke and something else, something burnt and chemical. The smell of war itself, carried on the wind. As you traveled further from the main supply hubs, the landscape changed. Civilian life thinned out. Villages stood eerily quiet, some seemingly deserted. Their windows boarded up, others filled only with the elderly, women, and children who hadn't been able to flee. Fields might be churned up, trees splintered, the gentle curves of the land interrupted by the roar. Geometric scars of trenches or the dark craters left by shell fire. You saw the increasing signs of military presence everywhere, columns of soldiers marching along the road's edge, convoys of other supply vehicles. Temporary camps set up in fields, their canvas tents stark against the green or brown earth. The soundscape shifted too. The familiar noises of farming or everyday life were muted or absent. Instead, the dominant sounds were military, the distant, persistent growl of artillery fire, sometimes a sharp crack closer by, the rumble of engines, the jangle of harnesses, the barking of orders, the low murmur of tired voices. You were moving closer to the source of the constant demand you helped satisfy, and the air felt different, taut with a subtle tension you hadn't felt back at the depot. You sat, bouncing along, your eyes scanning the roadside, not necessarily looking for danger in your role, but simply observing, taking in the altered reality of the world near the front. You saw the sheer effort involved just to maintain these lifelines, engineers repairing roads, men clearing debris, soldiers guarding bridges and intersections. Your little journey, carrying a few crates or a load of essential gear, was just one thread in this massive, constantly moving tapestry of transport. And as you watched the landscape slowly change, becoming more broken, more militarized with every mile, you felt a quiet respect for the sheer persistence required, not just to fight, but simply to keep things moving in such a disrupted world. The journey was often long, sometimes cold, sometimes hot and dusty, but it was never truly monotonous, because the proximity of the front, like a low, vibrating hum, was always present, a constant reminder of why you were here. Moving these essential goods along the scarred arteries of the war zone. Being on the road meant fleeting encounters, brief crossings of paths with others whose lives were also defined by the war, though perhaps in vastly different ways, stopping to rest the horses, or waiting while a truck was quickly repaired by the roadside, offered small windows into the wider world just beyond your immediate task. You might pull over near a makeshift field hospital, marked by a Red Cross flag fluttering bravely above canvas tents, or a commandeered farmhouse. The air there would carry the faint, but distinct, smell of antiseptic, bandages, and the low, often pained sounds of men inside. You wouldn't get close, wouldn't gawk, but the sight of stretchers being carried, or the pale, tired faces of walking wounded bundled in blankets, was a stark, quiet reminder of the ultimate destination of some of the supplies you carried, the medical gear, the blood plasma, the comfort items. These men were the sharp end of the violence, and their presence was a heavy, somber note in the landscape. Other times, you might briefly interact with groups of soldiers moving in the opposite direction, headed back from the front for a rare period of rest or refit. They would look different from the men you saw arriving at the depot, faces thinner, eyes older than their years, uniforms often stained with mud and weariness. A brief nod exchanged. Perhaps a quiet question about the road ahead or the conditions behind them. Their conversation, when they spoke at all, was often punctuated by long silences, the words themselves seeming inadequate to bridge the gap between where they had been and where you were going. You were bringing them the means of war. They were carrying the experience of it. Then there were the civilians you sometimes saw, particularly in the villages not yet completely emptied. An old woman watching from a doorway as your wagon rumbled past, her face unreadable, children playing listlessly in the dust, their games mimicking the soldiers they saw daily. You were an intrusion into their disrupted lives, another piece of the military machine that had overturned their world. Their presence was a quiet testament to the war's reach, extending far beyond the trenches into the rhythms of ordinary existence. You might share a brief, wordless moment with another supply driver pulled over with engine trouble, offering a shared cigarette or just a companionable silence born of mutual understanding of the challenges of keeping things moving. These interactions were often fleeting, measured in minutes or even seconds. But they were grounding. They reminded you that this immense logistical operation wasn't just about crates and mileage. It was about the millions of individual lives it touched and depended upon. Think about the sheer volume of messages and items flowing back and forth. It wasn't just bullets and food going towards the front. Letters, parcels from home, even things like requested books or small comforts flowed in the opposite direction, trying to connect the severed world of the soldier with the world he'd left behind. Your journey might involve carrying mail just collected from a field post office, each bag containing hundreds of individual hopes and anxieties packed into envelopes. You were part of the fragile network, keeping the human connection alive amidst the destruction. These brief encounters, these glimpses into the lives of others caught in the war's web, added layers to your understanding. You weren't just moving inanimate objects. You were indirectly connected to the soldiers who would use them, the wounded who needed them, the civilians whose lives were upended by the conflict they sustained. Your path, though quieter than the front lines, was interwoven with countless others, all part of the vast, complex tapestry of a world at war. Stepping out onto the road, even for a relatively short trip, quickly brought you face to face with the immense, inherent difficulties of moving anything, anywhere, in a war zone. The neat, predictable order you tried to maintain at the depot was constantly battling against a world determined to create chaos. The biggest, most relentless enemy wasn't always the opposing army, often. It was the environment itself. Think of the weather. For instance, a heavy rain could transform a seemingly solid road into a muddy, impassable quagmire in a matter of hours. We often hear about the mud of the trenches. But that mud stretched back through the entire landscape, swallowing wagons up to their axles, turning roads into treacherous swamps where trucks bogged down and horses struggled, their muscles straining. Breath misting in the cold air. Consider the sheer scale of this problem. During the Battle of Passchendaele, for example, the mud became so notorious that artillery guns sank out of sight. And movement became glacially slow. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a strategic impediment that stalled offensives and made the simple act of delivering a loaf of bread or a box of medical supplies a monumental task. This environmental resistance was a constant, exhausting factor for everyone involved in transport. And then there were the other, more immediate risks. Roads and railway lines were always potential targets for enemy shellfire or sabotage. A sudden bombardment miles away could sever a vital artery, causing massive delays and forcing circuitous, dangerous detours. Vehicles broke down. The early motor trucks were notoriously unreliable. And even wagons suffered broken wheels or injured horses. Every mile traveled was a minor victory against the forces trying to disrupt the flow. You heard the stories circulating back at the depot or shared quietly on the road. Tales of convoys ambushed, of trucks breaking down in isolated areas, of the sheer impossibility of moving heavy equipment through certain sectors after rain. These weren't just abstract problems reported in communiques. They were the reasons why a crucial shipment might be late, why you might have to work through the night to compensate, or why a particular route was now marked as dangerously unreliable ... in the face of such unpredictability and risk. It wasn't uncommon for people to turn to things beyond the practical. Soldiers were rife with superstitions, from lucky charms carried in pockets to rituals performed before going over the top. This extended, in quieter ways, to the supply lines too. You might hear a driver refuse to take a certain road on a Friday, or see a small, faded ribbon tied to the harness of a particularly reliable horse. Meant to ward off bad luck, perhaps someone always knocked on the wood of their wagon 3 times before setting off, a quiet plea for safe passage for themselves and their precious cargo. These were small, personal acts, born of a need to feel some measure of control in a world where so much was utterly random and dangerous. Your work, therefore, wasn't just about efficiency. It was an act of persistent defiance against mud, metal, and misfortune. It was about pushing through the difficulties, finding a way around obstacles, and ensuring that despite everything the world threw at it, the vital river of supplies somehow, always, kept flowing. Your sore muscles and tired eyes were a testament to this constant, unseen battle against the forces of disruption. As the weeks turned into months, and the war stretched on with its relentless appetite for men and material, your daily tasks began to feel less like isolated efforts and more like participation in a vast, unending process. You were a part of a colossal machine, and its sheer scale hinted at the transformations happening far behind the lines. Back in the towns and cities you had left behind, the constant arrival of goods at the depot, the endless train cars. The convoys of trucks laden with crates was a physical manifestation of a home front utterly geared towards war. You handled goods produced by factories that now worked around the clock, sometimes converted from making pots and pans to making shells and rifles. This required an immense shift in labor, with so many men away fighting. Who was doing all this work would hear about it in snippets of conversation, read about it in old newspapers used for packing material, or see evidence in the types of personnel sometimes assigned to auxiliary duties near the depots. Women were stepping into roles previously considered unthinkable for them. They were working in munitions factories, driving vehicles, taking on jobs in administration and logistics. The same demands that put a hammer in your hand or tasked you with driving a supply wagon were fundamentally reshaping the society back home. The necessity of feeding the front's insatiable hunger for supplies was forcing a societal evolution, pushing boundaries and overturning old norms out of sheer, practical need. Think about it: the gloves you might wear while handling rough crates, the boots you walked miles in, the canned food you sometimes ate for lunch. Each item was a tiny thread connecting you to thousands of unseen workers back home, many of them women, working long hours, their lives also utterly changed by the conflict. They were producing the very tools and sustenance that flowed through your hands towards the front. It was a massive, silent partnership spanning hundreds of miles, linking the factory floor to the muddy trench, with you somewhere in the middle, a crucial point of passage. This immense industrial and social effort wasn't just about equipping the army. It was about harnessing the entire nation's resources and will towards a single, brutal purpose. The sheer volume of goods moving through the supply chain was a constant, tangible reminder of the depth of the commitment and the sacrifice being made by everyone. Whether they were holding a rifle or riveting a plate on a new truck, your quiet work, essential and demanding, was a physical embodiment of this national mobilization. And in the moments of quiet between unloading trucks or waiting for manifests, you might reflect on this connection. That crate wasn't just wood and metal. It was the product of effort back home, the focus of hope that it would arrive safely and fear of what it would be used for, traveling through your hands to reach someone else whose life depended on it. The scale of the war was overwhelming, but seeing the physical proof of the nation's immense, coordinated effort flowing through your depot and down the roads gave you a quiet sense of purpose. You weren't just moving boxes, you were part of the force that was, for better or worse, moving the world. And so, as you stand here now, perhaps miles and decades away from that dusty depot or muddy road, you can look back on the quiet, often overlooked, role you played. You didn't storm a trench or lead a charge. Your name likely isn't etched in any grand monument, yet you were there, a vital conduit in the immense network that kept the war machine grinding forward. Think of the countless items that passed through your hands, each with its own story, its own destination, its own potential impact. The rifle that might have saved a life, the bandage that stemmed a wound, the letter that carried a soldier's last words home, or a loved one's hope to the front. You were the quiet carrier of fate, the unseen hand ensuring that the tools of survival and destruction made their way through the chaos. Your days were filled with the tangible, the weight of crates, the rough texture of rope, the smell of fuel or hay, the ache in your muscles at the end of a long shift. But your work connected you to the intangible, to the courage and fear on the front lines, to the relentless effort on the home front, to the strange blend of practicality and superstition that defined wartime existence. You were part of a hidden ballet, a complex choreography of movement that underpinned the more dramatic events history often remembers. This quiet persistence, this essential work done away from the spotlight, isn't just a story of the past. Think about it today, in our own time. The world is kept running by millions of people in roles similar to yours: the truck drivers, the logistics coordinators, the warehouse workers. The people who ensure supplies get where they need to go, often unnoticed, often undervalued. They are the unseen sinews of our modern world, facing their own challenges, their own forms of mud and breakdowns. But just as vital to the flow of everyday life, the journey we took tonight, stepping into your shoes in that time of upheaval, reminds us that history isn't just written by kings and generals, or even just by the soldiers in the thick of battle. It is also shaped, fundamentally, by the quiet dedication of the millions of ordinary individuals who kept things moving, who endured the routines, who faced the daily difficulties, and who, in their own way, were just as essential to the outcome. So, as you settle deeper into your own quiet space tonight, perhaps feeling the familiar weight of your own responsibilities or the simple comfort of stillness, remember the unseen journeys, the quiet efforts, the persistent flow of the necessary. They are the hidden currents upon which the great ships of history sail. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight, stepping into a forgotten corner of the past. I hope it has offered you a moment of peace, a different perspective, and perhaps a deeper appreciation for the quiet, essential work that shapes our world, both then and now, before you drift off completely. If you found a sense of calm or curiosity in this story, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It truly helps these quiet histories find their way to others seeking a moment of relaxation and reflection. Now, dim the lights if you haven't already. Let the sounds of the past fade gently away and ease into a restful night. Good night.